We're here at IPBC 2014 in Shanghai, and a lot of the discussion at the conference, as every year, is how to monetize intellectual property and, of course, defend it, protect it. The question, though, in many cases, as to where the intellectual property actually comes from, tends to be a bit forgotten, because after all, it's really about making sure that existing patents are monetized and that the patents are of good quality. But what about the inventors, arguably the source, the originators of all of the IP that's being debated here? Well, for that discussion, we turn to Paul Levins, who's President Australia and New Zealand for Intellectual Ventures. Thanks so much for making the time.
Hi Mark, great to be here.
So is it easier these days being an inventor?
Yeah, look, I think being an inventor has always been a challenge. So in some respects, we expect too much of our inventors. So we expect them to come up with the original idea, then protect it, and then maybe go find some venture money, work on a business plan. All these things you have to, it's a very rare inventor that can do all of those things. So our model really says, look, invention is too important an activity to discard inventions that may be transformative. So wouldn't it be great if inventors can actually make a living out of inventing?
Give us some examples. Do you actually have people who can?
Indeed, we've over time invested a large amount of money in creating an inventor network globally. We have about 25,000 inventors globally. 4,000 of those are actively inventing for us. We have 400 research and development institutions that also partner with us to invent. And the business there is really about presenting to that network problems that will transform the way an industry operates. And it's very diverse, both the inventor network and the problem sets that we look at. We look at everything from a material science problem through to a fertilizer issue, through to an optics issue, and through to a wearables device issue. All of these things are problems that we look at and examine and harvest back from that inventor network an inordinate number of solutions, which we then protect the intellectual property that's resident in those inventions and move from there.
But still, all the patent attorneys sitting behind you would argue that they do the same thing, that they welcome any inventor who comes along with an idea.
Yeah, I think the difference here for this part of the organisation that's Intellectual Ventures is that this is the creation of brand new assets. These are assets that the trade knows as unencumbered. They've not been licensed before. They're brand new assets that anyone can license. I think the other thing is that they've been very well curated for two things. One, their transformative quality. What sort of impact will they make in changing an industry or an industry problem? But secondly, how well can the intellectual property be protected? And those two things, I think, are unique as in an offering that a company like us brings.
Still, at the beginning, my first question was, is it easier being an inventor? It seems to me that actually being an inventor is becoming more and more complicated because of all the litigation, because even an inventor usually uses ideas harvested from elsewhere in order to create that transformative product.
That's right, that's a great observation. And in fact, what we seek to do is to try and create a model whereby the inventor can invent. And we protect the intellectual property for them, making sure that there's no prior art, making sure that it's protected in relevant jurisdictions, making sure that there's a monetisation path for them over time, so that they can focus solely on the business of invention and not worry about all that other element. And so the upshot of that is that they get better at inventing, and the world needs more and more great inventors.
What sort of issues still stand in the way that where you'd say this preoccupies you the most, this is where you lose the most sleep?
Yeah, I think some of the issues that we confront, that people have difficulty, I think, in understanding how you translate what is written in a patent into a product or a service. I think that is a big bridge that still needs to be crossed. We're crossing it, absolutely no doubt in that. In fact, people take development licenses because they see the inherent merit of the inventions that we've come up with through this inventor network. And the other feature of the inventions that we select are that they're extremely well described. So you can take the recipe, if you like, that's in that patent and put it into and have something that is a feasible proof of concept or prototype very, very rapidly. So, but make no mistake, there is still an issue with trying to, that is probably one of the hardest things, trying to get people to understand that you can move from a patent to a proof of concept or prototype in a relatively rapid space of time.
It's funny you should say that. I was half expecting you to say that the biggest difficulty is the quality of patents that then precludes inventors from patenting their own ideas.
Yeah, there's absolutely no doubt that there is an issue, a broader issue with the quality of patents in the patenting system, the patenting and licensing system. I know that's been a big topic of conversation here at the conference over these last 2 days. But the feature of our model is really about trying to lift that quality. We're not just trading in poor quality patents. We don't trade in poor quality patents, we trade in high quality patents. And the ones that we select from that inventor network are extremely high quality because they've been looked at not just by an attorney, but they've also been looked at by someone who has a deep understanding of the science that sits behind it.
I'm also a bit surprised that patents are hard to turn into practice, into tangible products. Isn't that the whole point of invention?
Oh, well, I think really it goes back to your point about what the quality of those patents can be. So I think people historically have looked at those patents and have looked at patents in broad and said, well, this is all very well, but what's the market process that brings it, into being a product? And I think increasingly our process has driven a greater discipline around inventors thinking, well, how do I cross that bridge to monetisation and product development at the same time as having an eye on the fact that there's prior art and it's a licensable
Because you couldn't argue that there's no financing. I mean, we've had 0 interest rates for 5 years.
Yeah, that's right.
The world's flush with money. Arguably, it should have been fairly easy to
That's
get
right,
these products out there.
Indeed we've had success. We've worked with, where we have found a lot of success is in fact working with small and medium enterprise partners who've got the core of a great patent portfolio, but they may not have thought about all of the protections that they need. So, for example, we work with a small to medium, really arguably a large enterprise from Finland called Raisio. This company produces a transformative product that when you feed to dairy cows, lifts not only the yield of the milk, or the amount of yield you get from a cow, but also the quality of the milk. This is an unheard of transformation in that industry. And we've been able to strengthen that patent core so that they get the full value of the licensing effort. And what's more, they can look at the patents, the new inventions that we've created in that additional patent protection and create new innovations rather than just have them sit as a wall of patents around the core innovation.
Finally then, you're active all around the Asia-Pacific region. You yourself cover a number of countries, obviously.
Indeed.
Apart from Australia and New Zealand. You're in Singapore frequently, in South Korea. What sort of changes are you seeing in each of these markets? Are they all moving at the same pace?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. I mean, what I'd say is that I think every jurisdiction understands the importance of intellectual property. As a lot of the emerging economies grow stronger and stronger and get bigger and bigger, there's absolutely no doubt that they're understanding that one of the things that will mark them out as a continuing growth economy is a reliance upon intellectual property, not solely a producer of products that generate from other people's intellectual property. So this is something that really, I think, is common across the region. And I think, particularly here in China, there's an enormous respect and understanding about the value of intellectual property.
That might surprise a few people.
Yeah, indeed. I think that is true. And I was very interested to hear commentary, not just from one or two, but from a range of people that say that as China expands and gets bigger and bigger and bigger, that in fact it understands that in order to play on the global stage to an even greater extent to what it already is, it has a mutual respect for those intellectual property rights. So much so that earlier today we heard a small company from Idaho taking on and winning a company that was infringing on its rights here in the Chinese courts. So really interesting developments, I think a commonality across the region and a real interest in the discussions that have taken place here at the conference.
One more thought,
Yeah.
seeing that you look after Australia and New Zealand.
Indeed. Yeah.
Australia has, by some measures at least, performed the worst when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions. Given the size of the population and the CO2, it seems that certain global reports mark Australia down very heavily. Do you see Australia also being at the solution end of this problem? Are we seeing Australian companies which you're obviously most close to, being based in Eastern Australia at least, being there to actually solve some of these problems too. Are there maybe some examples that you could give?
Yeah, it's a great point. In fact, I was somewhat depressed to see this morning that we were rated to be second from the bottom of the table on our interest in attacking greenhouse emissions and addressing those problems. What I would say is that there is a very strong debate that takes place in Australia. And in fact, I think the majority of citizenry and in fact the majority of politicians will say to you that there's absolutely no doubt that human efforts have contributed to climate change and over time. And there is also no doubt, however, that Australia punches above its weight for ideas to address climate change. And we're a relatively small economy, very sophisticated one, but a relatively small one. But there's absolutely no doubt that amongst the companies that I talk to, there's a commitment to addressing climate change, to doing things in a sustainable fashion, particularly in some of those very large industries that have traditionally been associated as being perhaps part of the problem, mining,
like resources companies,
and resources and so on. So certainly, to bring it back to something I know well, one of the areas that in the resources area, which is perhaps not digging things out of the ground but living on the ground, the horticulture and agriculture industry, there's a huge appreciation of the need for sustainability and a real effort to spend money on sustainability and issues that address climate change.
And that's translating into IP?
And that's translating into IP, which is where they're engaging with us to be able to solve some of those problems so that they can in turn protect intellectual property for its use and license across the world. And I think, in fact, that's where Australia's future lies, is in the protection of really great world-class intellectual property, and we live off the rent of those ideas rather than trying to pretend that we can necessarily become a global-scale manufacturer and compete with a China or a Korea or an India.
It's great to talk to you. Thanks so much, Paul.
Thanks, Mark. It was a great pleasure.
Paul Levins, who's the President Australia and New Zealand for Intellectual Ventures here at IPBC 2014 in Shanghai.